Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Katie Gee Salisbury, who is a writer and photographer. And Katie, I'm going to let you tell everyone what it is exactly that you do, that you
Sure.
write.
Well, I just finished writing and publishing a book, a biography of Anna May Wong, who was the first Asian American movie star, and it's called Not Your China Doll: The Wild and Shimmering Life of Anna May Wong.
Wonderful. And what do you think it is that draws readers to these kinds of books?
That's a great question. Well, I think with Anna May Wong, there's some built-in audiences. There's people who are already fans of her. I think also Asian Americans are really interested to learn more about her. She's such an icon, and she lived 100 years ago. So it's rare that you see such a public figure who's also Asian American. And then there's a lot of film buffs who are just love anything related to cinema. But I also wrote the book in a way to be a great story. It's very immersive. So in that sense, it's not a traditional biography. It's much more narrative driven. And so I wrote it in a way to hopefully draw more readers in, just to, kind of for the fun ride that is her life.
Okay. And why Anna May Wong? What was the inspiration for the series
So
or for the book?
So yeah, so I first learned about Anna May Wong 20 years ago when I was 19. I was doing my first college internship at the Chinese American Museum in Los Angeles, and on my first day of the job, the curator gave me a tour of the exhibitions, and one of them was photographs of LA's Chinatown throughout the years. And within that collection, there was a photo of Anna May Wong I think it was like a Moon Festival parade, and I didn't know who she was. But when I saw that photo, it kind of stopped me in my tracks, and I immediately asked, "Who's that woman?" She looks so modern and chic for someone who lived 100 years before. And I was told, well, her name's Anna May Wong, and she was this internationally famous Chinese American movie star. And my jaw kind of dropped because I couldn't believe that someone like her had existed, you know, way, way beyond my time. And I went home and asked my mom. I'm also half Chinese, and my mom grew up in Chinatown in LA. And so I went home and asked her, like, "Hey, do you know someone called Anna May Wong?" And she said, "Well, the name sounds familiar, but I don't really know anything about her." And I kept asking people, and nobody seemed to know who she was anymore. And so I also felt a sense of injustice that such an important figure in early Hollywood could be so completely forgotten. So it really set me on this path to one, wanting to learn more about her just because I was personally fascinated with her. Um, but also feeling that other people should know who she was. And the other piece of that too is that I think one of the things that really drew me to her was, the fact that our family histories are somewhat similar. So I'm fifth generation Chinese American. She was third generation. Um, our families both come from southern China in a region called Toisan. So we're all Cantonese. Um, she was born and grew up in Los Angeles. My mom was born and grew up in Los Angeles, and in her own way was kind of a rebel, and similar to the way that Anna May Wong was a rebel. So there were a lot of some similarities. And so in a way, researching and learning about Anna May Wong was also a way of learning some of my own history.
Hmm. Did you find it more interesting that she had a lot of opportunities that weren't available to a lot of Asian American women at the time?
Yeah, a lot of people do ask about that. Like, well, how did she break into
How
the
did you do
movies?
it?
And
Yeah.
yeah, and this was also kind of a fun period for me to research too, because so the beginning of Hollywood kind of dovetails with the beginning of Los Angeles becoming this metropolis. And so I got to go back and see, what is the history of this city and how did it come to be? And a lot of it has to do with movie making. So in many ways, Anna May Wong was in the right place at the right time because she's born in 1905. By the time she's 5 or 6, you've got movie studios coming from New York and New Jersey out to LA because they've realized they can shoot films all year round in California, and they have all these different settings. They can go to the beach, they can go to the mountains, they have the city, they have downtown Los Angeles. And all of these, movie studios are kind of fly-by-night operations. They just swoop into town. A lot of them are using Chinatown as free atmosphere because they don't have to build a set. They could just set up shop in Chinatown or in downtown LA. And, at this time, Anna May Wong, her dad runs a laundry just outside of Chinatown. She and her older sister Lulu are very often helping out at the laundry, making deliveries all around town. So while she's out and about doing these things, she comes across all these people in the streets, making films. And then, soon after that, she's ditching school to go to the Nickelodeons to watch, the flickers as they called them, and she's staying to watch them reel after, they replay them. She watches them reel after reel. And so she becomes like obsessed with it because for her, it's a creative outlet. It's an escape, but also she can see herself on the big screen. So from a very young age, from like 11 years old, she decides, well, I'm going to be a movie star. So she already has this very determined, ambition at such a young age. And, the films are just being made in the streets. So in that sense, it was easy for her to get her foot in the door. Also, people forget that movie making in the very beginning wasn't a prestigious industry. It wasn't taken seriously. Nobody considered it art. And a lot of the early stars, like Charlie Chaplin and Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks, they all came from very working class backgrounds. And they turned to movie making because it paid. They could make a lot of money that way and they needed to support their families. And then, it ended up becoming this very successful industry and they became huge stars, but nobody could have predicted that. So she gets her foot in the door at a time when you don't have all these people who are descending on Hollywood hoping to become a star. So she's really there before that happens. Yeah, so the timing was kind of impeccable for her.
That's great. And at that time, there were not very many Asian Americans in the industry.
Well, yes and no, because one of the interesting things that I discovered as I was researching this is there are actually quite a few other Asian actors, but also people working behind the cameras. We
Ah,
just don't hear about them anymore. So there's Sasu Hayakawa, who is a Japanese actor. He actually started in the films before Anna May Wong, and he was a huge hit in 1915 in a film called The Cheat. And he is actually Hollywood's first heartthrob. And then there were other Asian actors that Anna May Wong interacted with. They were all kind of supporting roles. And then we've got James Wong Howe, who becomes a cinematographer. Um, yeah, so there's actually a whole constellation of Asians and Asian Americans working in Hollywood, either behind the scenes as consultants or sometimes in front of the camera. But yes, Anna May Wong was the most well known of all of them.
hmm, interesting. And so, how much research did you have to do for this book? That sounds like
A
a
lot.
lot.
A lot of research. Yeah, I mean, there was so often I realized I was like, why did I why did I say I was going to write a biography? And, wouldn't it be so much easier if I could just make some of this stuff up? But no, I mean, I really enjoyed the research process because it is like you're on a wild goose chase and you make these discoveries and it can be very exciting. But yeah, I started researching the book in 2019 by going to Yale, where they have a bunch of correspondence from Anna May Wong with Carl Van Vechten. And then, once my agent sold the book on a proposal, that's kind of when the real work began. And unfortunately, we sold the book, and then like a week later, everything shut down during COVID. So I had to really, my plans kind of changed and ended up doing as much as I could from home, which turned out to be quite a bit because there are so many newspaper databases that have been digitized. There's also the Media History Digital Library that has a huge selection of movie magazines from that era. And then I ordered a lot of like out of print books to read biographies and memoirs from other Hollywood contemporaries. But that's kind of how I started. And then later on, I made archival visits to, I went to London to the British Film Institute to watch some of her rare European films that aren't actually, there's no copies of them here in the US. So that was a really magical experience. There's a lot of actually NYPL in New York has a lot of materials. And then Los Angeles, I spent a lot of time there as well at the Academy Library going through production files for all the films that she was involved in. So yeah, so a lot of research, because it's biography, you can't make things up, and you want to get it right, right? It's somebody's life, so that was pretty important to me.
So what was your favorite research story?
Hmm. Well, I think one of the really surprising discoveries I've made, I mean, it's unfortunately not a really happy discovery, at least in terms of like Anna May Wong's story, but it kind of occurred to me pretty late in the research process to look at some correspondence between her friends to see if they ever talked about her when she wasn't, in the room, so to speak. So she has two friends, Fanny and Marinoff, the wife of Carl van Vechten, and then Bernadette Sold Fritz, and their correspondence is both at Yale. So I went back to Yale for 2 days, and going through all this personal correspondence, and of course it's really difficult. A lot of it is handwritten, and you have to decipher people's handwriting from 100 years ago, which is not easy. And so I was like so thankful when letters started being typed. But I spent 2 days going through all this correspondence, and literally the last hour of the last day, like they were closing. I also had to leave because I had to catch a train. And I was like hurriedly, rushing through all these papers. And I finally found a letter where they spoke about Anna May Wong. And I didn't even have time to decipher it all there. I just had to take a photo of it and leave. And then on the train home, I was trying to make sense of what it said. And it was basically a description of is a letter from the 1950s. And that period of Anna May Wong's career was very difficult. She wasn't working as much. She was trying to figure out what to do. She couldn't get roles in films. She was trying to transition into TV. And then she made this trip to London because she said, well, I want to write my memoir. So I want to go back to London and kind of relive some of those memories. So on her way to London, she stops in New York and she's supposed to have lunch with Carl van Vechten and another friend. And according to this letter, she shows up to lunch so drunk that they actually have to carry her out of the restaurant and send her back to her hotel. And then the friend continues, Fania continues and says, and then I confronted her about this. I said, why are you doing this to yourself? Don't throw your life away. Like, I can understand why you're depressed and why you're drinking, but don't do it. And apparently that did not go over well with Anna May Wong. And they never spoke of it again. I mean, they continued to be friends, but they never spoke of that incident ever again. So it's a really interesting recounting of her struggle with alcoholism in her later years. And of course, it's a very devastating piece of information to learn. I think the most shocking part, though, was that Fania had kind of added, I don't know why she thinks that she can still be like the young actress that she once was. Like everyone, gets older. And then in the margins, she said, for she had no talent. And that was like, oh my God, like what a petty, bitchy thing to say
Oh,
about your
wow.
friend.
And this was a friend?
It was a friend. I mean, I think that, I'm sure there was some jealousy because Fania she was a stage actress and she never really
Ah,
made it in films. So I'm sure that there was some envy there as well.
must have been. Wow. So what was the biggest challenge that you had in writing and putting out this book? And how did you overcome that challenge?
It's certainly challenging to write about someone who's been dead for, more than 60 years. So most of the people who knew her are also gone. Um, and she really doesn't have any personal papers. Um, so, aside from the correspondence with Carl van Vechten, there really isn't anything else. So I assumed that it would be difficult in that sense to really get to know who she was and help to help foreground her personality and allow readers to also get to know who she was. Um, so I thought that that would be a big challenge. It actually turned out that she's done so many interviews, and she also actually wrote a number of pieces about her own life and about her thoughts on different topics. Um, and she had such a writerly sensibility. She really respected writers. She had a lot of friends who were writers. She was always reading. So she was very smart in that way. And unlike other actresses, I mean, her voice is just so clear, so defined. So you actually get so much of her personality, even just from her interviews. So I really tried to let her speak for herself as much as possible in the book by just quoting her. And you know, and then I think that allows readers to really dip into um, her personality and who she was. So I thought that that would be a big challenge, and it turned out not to be. I think what was more challenging, there were certain dead ends that I hit, things that I wanted to know more about that in the end it just wasn't possible. So, for example, she was friends with Paul Robeson. They were both in England at the same time. And I really wanted to know more about their friendship because I do feel like there was a sense of solidarity between them as entertainers of color who both had to go abroad to be acknowledged. And so I really wanted to know, like, what were the kinds of conversations or letters that they wrote to each other. And unfortunately, Paul Robeson's papers are private, so the family controls them, and they're just at this point not willing to let other people look at
Mm.
them, which is unfortunate. I mean, I was in touch with them, and they did say, you know, if we find anything related to Anna May Wong, we'll let you know. But you know, that was an unfortunate dead end. And so, you know, I do mention Paul Robeson in the book. He has kind of a small section because I also felt it was important to compare what it was like as a Black American versus being an Asian American. Just the types of racism they experience, you know, are somewhat different. So I felt that that was an important piece to include, but then there's not really, you don't get much of a personal connection between them because there wasn't any information for me to say, well, they went here and they, you know, they did this together or, you know, et cetera. It just, I don't have any information on that, unfortunately.
Oh, wow. Okay. Um, so what else can we expect from you in the near future? Another biography, maybe?
Probably not another biography, at least not just yet, because that was actually what I told myself the whole time I was writing this. Like, why did I sign up to write a biography? It's very difficult work, so I have a newfound respect for everyone who does it. I mean, who their whole career is writing biographies, and you get to understand why someone like Robert Caro, you know, takes 10 years to write one. I mean, you know, people are so complicated. There's so much that you have to take out of a biography essentially to make it fit into what we call a book. But yeah, I mean, I am thinking about, you know, next book ideas. You know, I might could be interested in doing another Hollywood type story. But I'm also interested, you know, as someone who identifies as mixed race, I'm interested in exploring that as well, and just
Mm.
some larger questions about race in America. So I'm really in the early stages of formulating some ideas. So we'll see.
Would it be nonfiction though, or fiction?
Yes, it'd be nonfiction, most likely nonfiction.
Mhm. It's interesting to figure out the the differences in writing in between writing a fiction and a nonfiction book. Um, because with the nonfiction, you really have to, I think you have to do a lot more research and and it's just a totally different type of writing. So I haven't interviewed very many people who were writing nonfiction books. So,
Oh, yeah, great. Well, I mean, it's interesting because so my background, I started out by working in book publishing as an editor. And then it just happened to be that I worked mostly on nonfiction. Because before that, I was really a fiction reader. And it's funny how it's completely changed because now I mostly read nonfiction. Although I do enjoy fiction because it's like a nice break from what I'm normally into. So I feel like I have a really good handle on how nonfiction works at this point, which was why I think that's always what I gravitate towards. But I would at some point, I think, like to dip a toe into fiction because to me it feels like more mysterious.
could you give us some tips, a few little tips about nonfiction and writing nonfiction?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things that I always kind of explain as an editor is that, you know, nonfiction is actually not as dissimilar from fiction as we think. I mean, at least in the sense of storytelling, right? Most,
Okay.
I mean, especially if it's a memoir or a biography or anything that's, you know, narrative driven. I mean, you have the same type of story arc, right? There needs to be a climax, kind of something that we're all working towards and some resolution at the end to make it feel satisfying. Then there's, you know, of course, there's different types of nonfiction. You have things that are more journalistic or reporting on a specific personality or incident or trend that's going on. And so that can be a little bit different, but you still have to think about, I mean, I think structure is always the biggest question. It's like,
Hmm.
how are you going to structure the book? And it's not always an obvious answer, right? Because there isn't a formula for it. But I think that that's the first thing that you really have to think about is you can delve into any topic with nonfiction, but you just have to think about how you're going to structure that investigation. And if you can put it into a narrative type container, I think that helps a lot more.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, because they're totally different things. Uh, okay. Now I have some questions about you about being a writer. What's your favorite part of being a writer on the whole writing and publishing process?
Hmm. I actually really enjoy the solitude, the ability to be kind of in conversation with other writers and ideas. And so the whole process of reading very deeply about something and then also writing, then formulating your thoughts and writing about it. And you do that in isolation for the most part, which sometimes can be difficult, right? Because nobody else knows what you're doing. But I think that the days that I've spent writing towards the greater goal of writing a book have been probably some of the happiest of mine. And they're just,
Hmm.
there's nothing like the feeling of having met your word count for the day.
Okay. Yep. All right. And now, what is the most challenging part of the writing process?
Well, also the writing. You know, that's the thing too, is it never really gets easier. I mean, some days are harder than others, but it's always scary for some reason, and there's always the temptation to put it off, to procrastinate. At least that's what I experience, and so um, just getting that first couple of sentences on the page when you're, you know, spending the day writing is usually the hardest part. Um, that you always dread. And then once you get through it, it's like doing yoga, I think. I mean, I'm not like great at yoga, but I always kind of slightly dread it. And then I go and I do it and I feel great afterwards. And that really to me is what writing is like.
Okay. So, what has been your favorite adventure during your writing career?
Favorite adventure. Um, So several years ago, I was working on a project. Was actually kind of it also combined photography and journalism, and it was a
Hmm.
project about Chinese restaurant workers in New York. And originally, the idea had just been that I would, photograph people, put together a photo essay, but it ended up being a lot more than that. And as part of, when I was reporting that story, I just met a lot of different people who were working in Chinese takeouts in New York City. And one of them, he invited me to go hang out with his friends to go to karaoke. And that was just like I mean, it was really fun, but also just so eye-opening. And to be brought in like a friend was really, I thought beautiful that they were willing to kind of share their lives with me in that way.
Wow. That sounds like it's a wonderful experience. Wow. Okay. Um, what is the greatest lesson that you've learned thus far in your writing career?
That is a good question, and I'm wondering what is it that I have learned. Um, well, I think you just have to really, I mean, you have to do the work. You have to do,
Mhm.
I mean, again, it's hard to be writing, and sometimes you're writing without, you're not being paid, you're writing towards something, nobody knows what it is except for you. So I think the important lesson really is believing in your own work, and bringing it to fruition, is just, I think that's the most important thing because um, anyone, I mean, you hear artists talk a lot about this, is that the hardest part is just showing up every day and doing it. And that's kind of what separates people who want to do these things and who don't from the people who end up doing it. Is just you're just kind of grinding away doing it every day. And it's not for fame or money. It's because you just love it and you feel like you have these stories and you have to get out. um, so yeah, I think just sticking with it even when it's hard is probably the lesson that I've learned.
Okay. And do you have any other pieces of advice that you'd like to give to other writers?
Um, I mean, I think that's probably it because it can be so difficult. It's just hard to, there are ups and downs, and you really have to um, believe in yourself to pick yourself back up when things are challenging or you're not getting anywhere, if you're pitching places and no one responds to you, that kind of thing. I think the other thing that's been really valuable is having a writer support group. So having
Mm,
other friends who are writers who you can go to when things are tough, who can help you brainstorm, who can sometimes look at drafts for you. Um, so that has been, especially during the pandemic when I couldn't meet up with people in person, a part of this small writers group. We have our own WhatsApp channel, and we'll just check in with each other, set goals for the year, see how people are doing, etc. And that has been really helpful and really motivating. And you feel like you have your like a built-in like cheerleading squad for you, like when things are rough.
So are there any groups, clubs, or organizations that might have helped you as a writer that you'd recommend to other writers?
Well, one thing that was helpful, it was very specific to me, is the Asian American Writers Workshop. They're just really supportive of Asian American writers, and they have created a platform where we can tell those types of stories. So some of my earliest pieces were published there, and so I'm really grateful for the opportunities that they continue to give people. So I think maybe for all writers, it's like looking for certain organizations or publications that are a bit more grassroots, that have more flexibility, are open to things that might not always be mainstream, and who want to support emerging writers. So I feel like, I mean, I don't know all the organizations that do those types of things, but I feel like they
Hmm.
exist within different communities.
Yeah, I've heard of quite a few. Um, I think there's a Latino organization and other organizations as well.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Now I have questions about you as a person. What is one thing that people don't realize about you?
Well, most people don't realize that I'm part Chinese. Um, so that is always an interesting experience for me, and something I think about a lot.
Yeah, I can understand that. I can understand that because look, um, you don't really look Chinese per se. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing because I've traveled to a lot of places, and so the way people perceive me changes depending on where I am. And like one of the really interesting experiences I've had is that traveled to Tanzania and South Africa, and for whatever reason, everyone there knew that I was Chinese. It was really
Uh,
funny because they would shout at me like, "Hey, China!" So it was a very kind of like out of body experience. Or like, are you talking to me?
oh, wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. Um, is there any one question that you would like interviewers to ask you that
Hmm.
they haven't asked you?
I don't know. I mean, I actually think the last question you just asked, like, is there anything people don't realize about you? That I like being asked that question, actually.
Okay.
So
Good.
I think that's probably the question I'd like to be
Okay.
asked more often.
Okay. What are your passions when you're not writing? And how do you make time for the things that you love?
Well, I love film. clearly, since I've
Clearly.
written a book about a film actress. Yeah, it is actually hard to find. I mean, I love going to the movies in person. There's nothing like watching a film on the big screen. So that it is kind of hard to find time to do that because you've got to go someplace, you've got to plan it out. But I try to, I live in Brooklyn. There's an Alamo draft house where it's like a dine-in theater. So my husband and I try to go there pretty often, especially during like awards season or like right before awards season. We'll try to go and like watch all of the films that are being nominated. I also am really into plants and gardening. And I wish, yeah, it always feels like I'm trying to squeeze it in, because I actually, like, for example, I have a bunch of seeds I've been meaning to plant in kind of the front of our building, and I have like a kind of container garden there. And so every day I'm like, when am I going to do it? Because they still gotta start growing, so I can get the flowers eventually. So it is difficult to balance with everything else that's going on, but I do really having a lot of plants in my home and having the flowers and other plants outside. It really um, I just enjoy it so much. I mean, I get to watch the bees and the butterflies come, and you see kind of how the seasons change with the plants, and you get to see their growth in real time. One of the plants we have is a blueberry bush, so I'm pretty
Oh,
excited about that because we will harvest it at some point. And the blueberries they were, at least last year, they were very good. So it just brings me a lot of joy to be able to do that.
oh, nice. Okay. Now, what does your writing space look like? And what
Well,
do
you're
you
looking at
okay, and
it.
what do you need to have with you when you're writing or editing? And what sort of food or drink do you need to have with you?
Well, I always have a glass of water because, I'm always thirsty. I like to stay hydrated. This is my writing space. I really kind of made it a fun, comfortable space, like a place that I love to spend time in. Has a lot of plants as well. You probably can't see them because they're in the window, but so I think I mean, it's like quiet and an environment where you can focus. Um, so that's kind of important to me. Although I have a lot of things, it's kind of organized clutter. So if things are like out of sorts, if everything is messy, then it's hard for me to concentrate. But I really just like having this space to be able to shut the door and just focus on one thing, and not respond to emails or texts or anything like that. Yeah, and then glass of water, and then I do try to stay stocked with snacks. So it depends on depends on what we have in the kitchen, but granola bar or a rice cake or something like that.
Okay, and when you're writing or editing, do you like silence or music?
Oftentimes, especially if I'm writing, I mostly need silence because
Okay.
if I get too into the music, then I get distracted. And then if I'm editing or doing things that don't require quite as much mental energy, then I'll play some music.
And
So
what
it's kind
kind
of
of,
a combination. Oh, what kind of music?
yeah.
Well, while I was writing this book, actually, I like to listen to soundtracks since there's no words. So
Hmm.
that's easier to concentrate with in the background. So yeah, I was listening to a lot of I'm also a big Star Wars fan, so Star Wars soundtracks, Game of Thrones soundtrack, Westworld, like also some Hitchcock soundtracks. So basically anything. And then I think I was also listening to, because since I was writing about the Thief of Baghdad, um, that was created by Douglas Fairbanks, and then Anna May Wong has her first breakout role in that film. A lot of the score for that film was kind of ripped from the Scheherazade. I don't know what it's called. It's like anyways, it's a famous classical song. So I listened to a lot of that actually because it felt like on theme.
Okay, yep, I can see that. And authors um, a lot of times have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions to help them with their work. And do you have any, and do they help or hinder you? And I don't know if you heard in the background, I have two cats that were just that were just playing with each other.
Oh. I actually don't, we don't have any furry friends. I mean, I do love animals. I grew up with cats and dogs. But I've not felt ready for that responsibility here in New York City since we don't have a lot of space. So yeah, no furry friends here.
Now I just have two more questions for you. Where can people find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? And
Mhm.
I have to give a plug to Annie's. You can you can get Katie's book at Annie's if you call us at 508-796-5613, or you can email us at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com. And where else can people find your book?
Well, I have a website, notyourchinadoll.com. So that actually has more things related to the book. I've actually created a reader's guide that's there on the site. There's kind of a somewhat interactive map of Anna May Wong's Los Angeles, so you can kind of see all the different places that she used to either work or go to or live. And it gives you the addresses, so if you ever go to Los Angeles, you can actually track them down if you want.
Great.
So there's a bunch of things on my website. I also have an Instagram account that's dedicated to the book called Anna May Wong Book. And I try to post a lot of interesting photos of her and any information I have about them. And then I also write generally, it's a monthly newsletter. It's called Half Caste Woman. So it's just halfcastewoman.substack.com. So it's kind of like someone was saying it's like when you get software updates, that's like what the newsletter is because it's like updates on Anna May Wong or smaller dives into various aspects of her life that didn't make it into the book. So
Mhm.
I will kind of dig into other things there about Anna May Wong or about Asian American representation in Hollywood. So it's a fun place for me to talk about some of the things that just, wouldn't make it into the book.
Okay. But where can people find the book? What
Oh, it's fine.
bookstores or
Oh, I mean, generally, I think wherever books are sold, I mean, it's at Barnes and Noble, it's on Amazon, it's also at bookshop.org. If you're in
okay.
New York, I know that they have it at Greenlight, and I think McNally Jackson, it's at the Strand. So yeah, a bunch of different bookstores, and I will actually be doing some events in Los Angeles next week since it's Asian American Heritage Month. So
Right.
there's a bunch of things we've got planned there.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much. You answered both questions at once.
Oh,
So,
oh, great.
so
Thanks so
thanks
much for
very much.
having me.
Thanks, Katie G. Salisbury, and it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much, and good
Likewise.
luck with your book, Not a China Doll.
Thank you so much.